And it is a privilege to not just be with you, but to be able to talk about a topic that next to following Christ, I believe it's one of the biggest decisions you'll make in your life. That this issue of husbands and wives has the ability in many ways to make or to devastate your life. And we get the opportunity to talk about that tonight. So as I was preparing for these 11 verses in Ephesians 5, I wanted to see what's kind of out there on marriage. So I just Googled marriage books. And it pulled up at the top of the Google search bar, it said over 100,000 plus hits on just the phrase marriage books. There's over 100,000 books out there right now on marriage. I typed in dating, and it came up over 50,000 book results on dating. I loved it. It had them in order, and the top book said, Dating Sucks, But You Don't. That was the first book that popped up, and you can guess the tagline. It said, A Guide for Guys. That I was like, I didn't really even need that. I kind of knew that was a guy book when you got Dating Sucks, But You Don't. The next one was a dating playbook for men. So evidently men are searching dating books more than ladies, because all these men book popped up, or maybe Google knows me. AI knows I'm a guy, but that's what popped up. But there's money to be made in this area of telling young people and old people about marriage and what we're meant to do. And I just thought 100,000 books, and I have no idea how many words are on a page, but if a book has 200 pages, just how many words are written on how you can have a good marriage. And yet, if you look at divorce rates, the reality is we haven't figured it out. That whatever the number of the words is, it's either the wrong words or it's not enough. And into that context, Paul's going to give us 11 verses. I counted them up this morning. 220 words. Paul's going to give us 220 words in these verses. It took me, I timed myself, it took me just over a minute, about a minute and 20 seconds. And I read with a Kentucky accent, so I don't read quickly. I was able to read his words in a minute and 20 seconds. And that Paul can take this topic that literally is filled in libraries, and he can boil it down to 220 words. And what he's going to do is pretty fascinating. He is going to give one command to ladies, and he's going to give one command to men. And you know, as a dad, when my boys, we've got 3 boys, our youngest is in college, so he's about your all's age. And when I get a chance to talk to him, I want to give him like 15 things. Like he was home for Easter and he's getting in the car. My tendency is to say, hey, don't speed. He goes to Oklahoma State, watch the construction up in Gainesville. You know, like I list out like 15 things. He doesn't remember any of them. He's just trying to think what he's going to listen to on Spotify. But as a dad, like I feel like I got to get all these things out. And your all's parents probably do that too, where they hit you with this long list of stuff. And I think Paul, he doesn't do that. He's going to give us one command for each of us. And then he's going to spend the rest of the 220 words saying, let me tell you what that looks like. Let me describe that. And that, ladies, if you get this right, then, man, your life, I don't know what you're going to make. I don't know where you're going to live. I don't know what size your house is going to be, but life's going to be pretty good. And men, if you get this one thing right, you do this. I don't know a lot of other stuff. I don't know what you're going to look like, what your bench press is going to be, your bank account's going to be, but life's going to be pretty good. And so he's just going to unpack that for us. And so we want to walk through these verses, and just leading up to them, you'll remember as you guys have been walking through Ephesians, y'all have been walking through, Paul gives 3 chapters of theology, 3 chapters of doctrine, and then he gives 3 chapters of, okay, what's it look like on a Monday to Saturday in shoe leather, you know, when you're out there at work or wherever. And he says in chapter 4, he says, walk in a manner worthy of your calling. And then he gives us 5 walks. Remember, he says, walk in unity, walk in light. That's chapter 4. The beginning of chapter 5, walk in love. Walk in, it escapes me right now, walk in something else. There's some other one there. And then he's in chapter 5, verse 17 that y'all looked at probably last week, he says, walk in wisdom. And he's going to kind of show what that looks like. He says, walk in wisdom, make the most of every opportunity. And he describes it with these 4 phrases, and we won't go through them, but what he really says is walk with wisdom, live thoughtfully. You know, most people I know just kind of go through life on autopilot. And he says live thoughtfully, live purposefully, live with intention. That's what walking in wisdom looks like. And then he tells why it's important. There he says, because the days are evil. And that if we are not intentional and careful, the struggle, the world, the culture, everything just kind of pressures in on us. And the days are evil. And so we have to live with intentionality. And we have to live worshipfully. And then he does something in verse 22 where we're going to start looking at today. And he's still talking about what's it look like to walk with wisdom. And I would have thought he would talk about, you know, like all these big academic ideas or, you know, wisdom is, you know, like school, college stuff. But what he does, he's going to spend the next 20-something verses focusing on the most intimate, closest relationships you and I have. And he's going to say that walking with wisdom is walking carefully, purposefully with those who are closest to you. So we're going to get 11 or 12 verses on marriage. Next week, you'll see parents and children. You'll see workers and employers. But these relationships that we live in on a daily basis, he's going to say, this is what wisdom looks like. And so let's look at it together here. And I will tell you, I think these are very important verses. I can name names of people who were sitting in the same chairs you are 30 years ago that were in a college group with Carrie and I, who are now divorced, who are alienated from their children, who had the same dreams and goals and desires you have now. In their lives, the evil days kind of got them. And you guys have such potential and possibility. Like life, these big decisions are before you. And that's why I think it's so great for us to look at these verses. You may be saying, I'm not married. Why do I need to look at it? But I will tell you, these characteristics we're going to see don't just happen overnight. They don't happen in a wedding ceremony. These are things that now you need to be cultivating in yourself. And these are things you need to be looking for in a potential spouse. And so we're just going to walk through these. We're going to see the command, and then we're going to see how Paul explains that command. And then what I want to do after we walk through both women and men is just take a couple minutes to say, so what's that look like for you now? All right? And where we're going to get to is how do you become this person? And how do you look for this person? And so we'll answer that a little bit. Then I think there's going to be a song and a break. And then Carrie and I, for anybody that wants to stay, we'll stay and answer questions as long as you want. But we'll do kind of a Q&A thing up here in a little bit. But let's just look at this command. You know, Paul's a gentleman, so he begins with the lady. He always starts with the lady first. And so in these verses, he's going to give women about 3 or 4 verses. And then he's going to give men double that. Because as men, we need double that. But we see the command here that Paul's going to give women. This is the one thing he requires of women. He says here in verse 22, wives, be subject or be submissive to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be subject to their husbands in everything. And so there's one command there. The command is, wives, be subject or be submissive. In fact, the word's not even there. It's picked up from verse 21, where it says that you and I as Christians are meant to be subject or submissive to each other. And Paul says in the way that we are submissive to each other, he now picks that word up and says, wives, especially for you in the marriage relationship, that we are called, wives are called to be submissive in the marriage relationship. Now, I know, I remember talking to a lady where I used to work and talked about submission. She was talking about wedding vows that talk about submit. And her comment was, I'm not a dog. And so I think maybe in our culture we need to unpack this a little bit. So I just want you to notice 4 things about, especially verse 22 here. This command, commit. The word has the idea, it's a military word. We would say it in kindergarten, get in line. That there is hierarchy, there's structure. It's the same word used in 1 Corinthians about Jesus getting in line behind the Father. Not that Jesus is less God than the Father, but God has put order and structure. And so Jesus lines up behind the Father in the way a wife lines up behind the husband. Let me point out 4 things. First is the context we've already talked about. All of us are called to be submissive. That's a characteristic that guys, girls, we are all meant to cultivate. All right? It's not a thing like that's just a girl thing. That's a Christian thing, is we are meant to cultivate submission. In the same way, we're going to see in a minute, husbands, love your wives. Back in chapter 5, verse 2, all of us are meant to walk in love. So we all walk in love, but in a marriage relationship, the husband especially is called to walk in love. We all walk in submission, but in the marriage relationship, the wife is called especially to walk in submission. So that the context is, this is something we all do. It's not just a wife thing. Second thing is, notice the limit. This would have been a surprising verse. For us, this is an offensive verse because how dare you call me, some women would say, to submit to my husband. In that day, the thought was every woman is less than every man, and so every woman should submit to every man. Here's a quote from Josephus. Women are inferior to men in all ways, and so the male is to rule. That's the way the thought was back then. And so I think the limit is, here a wife is called to be submissive, but it's only to her own husband. So ladies, if you're dating a guy now and he's trying to control you, you need to talk to Amy or Presley or somebody and say, is this right? Because you are not required to submit to a boyfriend. If a guy at work is trying to do that, you're not required to submit. In a work relationship, you want to submit as an employee, but this is something that's limited to a husband and a wife. In that day, this would have been a very freeing thing, I think, for ladies. And so the context, it's everybody. The limit, this is specifically just talking husbands and wives. The manner that a wife is to submit. Notice what it says, as to the Lord, that a husband does not have to earn your submission, because ultimately Christ has earned your submission. And a husband, you don't just submit to a husband because he's a good guy. Your submission to a husband is an act of worship that you give to Christ. And so Christ has earned your submission, and he has delegated that to your husband. And so your act of worship in your marriage relationship is that this is a gift that you have the opportunity to give. It's for Jesus that we do this. It's going to be interesting as we go through. Wives, the command is submit. Why do we do that? Look to Jesus. Husbands, love. Why do we do that? Look to Jesus. That it all revolves around Jesus is what Paul's going to say. And so the manner of submission is you submit to a husband in the same way that I forgive somebody who cuts me off on the road. In Ephesians 4, it talks about I forgive as Christ has forgiven me. That my relationship, and there may not be reconciliation, but I forgive. I can give forgiveness freely. It can be one way, because I'm doing that because I love the Lord, not because this person has earned my forgiveness. For reconciliation, there has to be some work, but I can forgive freely. A wife can submit freely because the submission is unto or as to the Lord. And then finally, the reason. So the context, the limit, the manner, the reason. And it says the reason here is because God has established that the husband is the head of the wife. If you do any reading, there's a lot of debate about what this word means, head. What's it mean to be the head of something? It's popular today to say, well, that means source. That means like the husband is the source of the wife, like headwaters. So the Rio Grande River or whatever, the headwaters are in Colorado, the mountains that melt and it comes down. That's never what the word means in Greek. It always has the idea of authority. And so when Paul says the husband is the head of the wife, what he's talking about is authority. And it's the same word used, as I mentioned before, in 1 Corinthians 11, that the Father is the head of Christ. That doesn't communicate anything about Christ's value, that he's less than the Father. It doesn't say, anything about his abilities, that Christ can do less or anything. It's simply that God has established hierarchy. And in marriage, this is the way he's established it. So let me say a couple things real quick about what submission doesn't mean. And then when we come up and do Q&A, if this is something you struggle with, we can talk more about it. Submission does not mean that a lady is less than a man or the man is superior than the lady in any way. All right? That Galatians 3 says, before the cross, there is no male nor female, no slave nor free, nor Jew nor Gentile, race, gender, all that goes away, that we are all saved by grace and that we are equal before the cross. And so it's not a statement of value. It does not eliminate independent action. That when you get married, it doesn't mean you have to become a robot or you have to become submissive or you can't do anything without your husband's approval. It doesn't mean you can't express your opinion. Yeah, Carrie and I early on had to work through this, that Carrie's incredibly gifted. She's a great speaker. I think the better speaker in the family. Carrie is professionally, she's so gifted in so many ways. And when it came to raising our kids, it was like, well, I need to not say anything. And it was like, that's to the detriment of our kids. Our kids need you to speak into that. We need to work through that. Leadership, my leadership doesn't mean you have to be silent. Speak up. Utilize your gifts. There was a song when we were young that always let her dance. And it was the idea that as part of a husband's role is to find out where's your wife gifted and help her to bloom, help her to dance in those areas. And so submission is not those things. I think submission means that you willingly help, follow, and support your husband as your husband leads the family. Okay? Let's talk about the male real quick. Let's talk about what we are commanded to do as men. If you know history, these verses have been abused by men throughout history. That men have lorded over, have dominated women. And that is not what Paul's doing. Let's walk through what Paul says. And I will say, if a man does what Paul commands, most women would love to come under the headship, the leadership of this kind of man. And so for men, it's not, man, look at me, I can beat my chest, hear me roar. It's how do I become this man? That leadership is not just a privilege, it's a responsibility, it's an obligation. And I will tell you, men, I feel like we get the heavier weight put on us. Let's look at it. Again, there's going to be a command and then explanation. So the command, husbands, love your wives. And we are called to love them. This would have been a shocking thing. For us, women submit. That's the tension point for us. In the first century, it's no big deal. Women submit. Yeah. Women are property. The shocking thing would have been husbands, love your wives. I travel in missions. I was in Dubai a few years ago with a buddy of mine, Dave Furman. I don't know if Dave's been here. Dave was a Denton Bible guy, and their missionaries, Dave and Gloria, are now out in Dubai. And we're walking through, and there's all these gold shops. And I'm like, hey, what's the deal with gold? And he said, so women here, like you'd notice, women walk behind. Carrie was with me, and so women walk behind. You don't walk side by side. Women are all covered up. And he said, women here are property, and men can divorce women for any reason. If a man divorces a woman, everything the woman has is taken away from her. The only thing a woman gets to keep legally is gold. And so if a man really loves a woman, if he really loves his wife, he will give her gold, because that means he's giving it to her and he can never take it back. And I just thought that was fascinating. because men weren't required to love in the Middle East. This text, I think, should be understood in that context. Husbands, you have an obligation to love your wives. And in Paul's view, marriage is meant to be reciprocal. As Carrie is submitting and helping me, I am loving and shepherding her. And look what Paul's going to do. He's going to give us more description than he gave ladies, because I think he wants to make sure we don't misunderstand and abuse submission. So look at the manner here. Husbands, love your wives. Again, going back to Christ, just as Christ loved the church. With women, he just said, just as, but because you're submitting to Christ. He doesn't give a lot of explanation. He's going to give 4 descriptors here in these remaining verses. I just want to run through them real quick and describe them for you, because for men, he wants to make sure we don't misunderstand this. Mike Scheer, you love Carrie. Okay, I'm doing pretty good with that. If he just leaves it there and I get to define love the way I define love, like, man, I feed her, we watch ball games together, like all that kind of stuff. He says, no. Let me tell you what love looks like. I never had anybody, I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was an elder. I was involved in post-Christian athletes that discipled me. I lived here since 1991, went to seminary. I never had a man say, this is what spiritual leadership looks like. What Paul's going to do right here is he's going to say, this is what it means to be a spiritual leader. And so, guys, y'all need to pay attention to this. Look what he's going to say. First, he says, as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. He doesn't say used her, took advantage of her, had her cook dinner, any of that type of stuff. He gave himself for her. That Christ's love, that spiritual leadership is first self-sacrificing. It's sacrificial. That if I'm loving Carrie correctly, I'm prioritizing her needs over mine. If somebody needs the broken down car, it's not her, it's me. And that's not because I'm a good guy. I'm that because verse 25 tells me. I take the hit. Christ took the hit for me. I take the hit for her. Verse 26, and he doesn't just do it for random things. It says that Christ gave himself up for her so that he might sanctify her. That his self-sacrifice, his sacrifice is purposeful. It's for her good. That he is building into her. Christ didn't just give himself up in random areas, but he gave himself up in the areas of her greatest need, the church's greatest need. He died for her. And we're meant to be purposeful like that. First Peter 3 also talks about husbands and wives. And there it says, husbands, live with your wife in an understanding way. And so I need to give myself up for Carrie, and I need to do that to sanctify her. I need to know her strengths. I need to know her weaknesses. I need to know how can I encourage her in the Lord. For us, Carrie studies her Bible. She challenges me she reads her Bible more than I do. And so for me, sanctifying her is not me saying, hey, let me read you. I'm going to read the Bible to you. But it's, hey, we're going to read, and then we're going to come together, and we're going to go get coffee, and we're going to talk about what we're learning independently. We're going to do these talks together, and we're going to talk about marriage in a passage like this so that we can apply that to you guys and be honest in it. And that's what it looks like to sanctify her. What the wife you may marry, what she needs may be different, but it needs to be purposeful in an understanding way. Verse 26, I think it needs to be spiritual, so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word. And I love that Paul doesn't say the husband should have an hour quiet time working through all the Greek participles, 3 nights a week, and like just set some really high standard. But what he says is, you as the guy, I as the guy, it's my responsibility to set the spiritual climate in my family. Does that make sense? It may look different in my family than it does for you. I need to set that spiritual climate. I need to be the one that's initiating conversation. I need to be the one that hopefully is leading in prayer. Carrie's a much better, more consistent prayer than I am. And for a while, she suffered in silence in that. And I was like, hey, you can always say, how about we pray? Because a lot of times I just don't think about it. Like I'm watching the ball game or doing whatever. And if she says, hey, let's pray, I want to get behind that. My leadership, hopefully, is creating an atmosphere where she can say that and we can do that. I don't always have to be the instigator of ideas, and that works for us. But I think each couple has to figure out, how do you do this? But as a man, spiritual leadership looks like I put her needs first. I sacrifice for her. And I do that in very purposeful ways, not in ways that are easy for me, but the ways that build her up. And I do that in spiritual ways. I got a buddy who's a little bit older than me, and he says every year he asks his wife, are you better off today because you married me? And he says, I never want her to get to a point where she thinks, my life would have been better, I would have been more fulfilled, I would have been closer to Christ, I would have been fill in the blank if only I hadn't married this dead weight. And he says that conversation is a great conversation because it lets her speak into areas of his life. And he creates that. And I think that's the way we're meant to be. My hope is that Carrie would always say that I am closer to Jesus Christ because I married Mike. I can say that about Carrie, and I think that's what we're meant to be. And just real quick, he's in verse 28, he's going to give us a second example, that we love our wives not just as Christ loved the church, but as we love our own bodies. And we do that, the two words are nourishing and caring. I feed my body, I bathe my body, more now than I did when I was a single, but I bathe my body. I take care of my body. My body is a priority to me. And I need to be doing those things for my wife. And so if you're in a dating relationship, or even if you're not, what would it look like to become the kind of guy that is going to be self-sacrificing? Because I will tell you, a selfish guy does not put on a tux and become a selfless guy. Doesn't happen. A guy who's just about the next thing, who's not intentional, who's not purposeful, who's not wise, doesn't put on a tux and become purposeful or spiritual or caring. Those are things that you need to be cultivating before you ever meet that girl of your dreams. Because if you meet the girl of your dreams, if you meet the girl of verse 22 to 25, who's going to serve you and love you and respect you and submit to you, and you've not done those things, she's not going to be attracted to you. She's going to look for a guy who's done that. And so we're meant to do that now. That's why I think this passage is so important, is that you have the opportunity now to work on creating the character and the heart that God will say, that's a life I can bless. He may not provide you a spouse. I can't say he will. But that he will say, that's a life I can choose to bless, both for a girl and for a guy. And so do you see the passage? It's really a simple passage. Women, 100,000 books out there. What do I need to do? You need to submit to your husband as you would to the Lord. Never make it to where that husband says, that lady is a ball and chain around my neck. Another talk for another day is marriage is a good gift from a good God. It is meant to be a delight. In most marriages, a lot of you guys come from families where the marriages are not that. And no guy wants a nagging, bitter, disappointed wife who just thinks, man, the worst thing I ever did was marry you. And so ladies, you start working on your heart now. How do I become that type woman? And then guys, no lady wants, she may like your pecs and your car and stuff for now, but I can tell you 30 years later, that stuff fades away. Luckily, I'm 6'4", because I got a bald spot right there that you can't see, and I can comb over it right now, but I'm a year away from not being able to do that. I'll get on that screen over in that other room sometimes, and I'll turn around, and the delay, it's like a second delay, so I'll turn around and do something and get ready to turn back, and I'm like, who is that bald man on the screen? And it's there, you know, that stuff just happens. Carrie told me on our first anniversary, we're reading at a pool. This has nothing to do with our talk. And she elbows me at the pool, and I got a book. I'm like, what'd I do? And she goes, one or the other. And I'm like, one or the other? And I look up, and there's this really fat, bald dude across the pool. And she goes, one or the other. And I'm like, well, I can't control the hair, so I better watch the weight. And so we've worked on that. We also keep all compliments physical between us. You got to know your spouse. We keep all compliments physical after 40 years old. I'm like, don't tell me I'm spiritual. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear I'm sexy. That's what I want from her. And so we do that, right? That's what we do. She lies to me whenever she sees me. And but I forget what I was talking about. But anyway, guys, you need to be cultivating these attributes in your life. How do I become selfless and purposeful and spiritual and caring? I do that. I know one guy who's done that well, and that's Christ. And I do that by growing close to Christ. I would say the greatest thing you can do for your future spouse is to grow in your walk with Jesus. That's the greatest thing you can do. And then how do I look for somebody who's cultivating these things? I think you look for these attributes. I will be honest, and God was gracious to me, but submission and a gentle spirit and all that stuff was not the first thing I looked for in a girl. I looked for beauty, and by God's grace, I got all the other stuff too. But I will encourage you as guys, what are you looking for in women? Get friends around you. Have that conversation. What should we look for? Let guys speak into your life. Because guys, we get blinders on. And if you're dating somebody, your friend should have the ability to say, brother, that girl's not good for you, I don't think. Or sister, that guy is not good for you. And we need in community to come around each other and to be cultivating these things in our lives, to be growing in Christ in our lives. It's the greatest thing you can do for your marriage. I will tell you, we're doing a marriage conference here sometime this fall. And we're doing it with a bunch of coaches as well. And we're doing it on Ephesians 4, 2, and 3. That the gospel should cause us to walk in humility and gentleness and patience. And you may not believe it now, but if you get a spouse with those three things, man, your marriage is going to rock. But man, if you get a spouse that doesn't have that, life can be hard. Life can be hard. And so literally we do these things, just in closing, because we are members, verse 30, of His body. I'm meant to look like Christ in my marriage because I am a part of Christ's body. Carrie's meant to look like Christ in her marriage. That what we believe is meant to impact the most intimate parts of our lives. And I can't tell you strong enough, that is what you want. That is what you want. Pray for that. Seek that. Become that. And God, by His grace, might bless you with, we're at 28 plus years. I should have asked her because I'm the date keeper. She wouldn't have known. But we're at 28 plus years. And by God's grace, I love her more today than I did when we got married. And I loved her a lot when we got married. But God has been so gracious. And I know He can to you as well. And it's 220 words. 220 words. 2 commands. And you do this, man, life is sweet.
All right, some of you making your way in, but we're going to get rolling on this. So you know Mike now, or Aunt, or what is it, Uncle, whatever?
We'll go with Mike. Yeah.
Mike, yeah.
Stop it. Who said it? Kick him out.
He's gone. You're kicked out. This is Carrie right here. Carrie is amazing. She's done a lot of ministry with DBC as well, specifically with counseling. Equipped to Counsel Monday nights. Not a sponsor, but a shout out. Maybe it could be a sponsor. And so we want to take a few questions. You guys have already been sending in a ton, but we'll start with, and maybe go through this chronologically. So I'd love to know on y'all's thought process just about dating. How to do dating well. And I think one of the ways that it was asked was pretty good. What is the difference between dating just kind of in its simplest form, and then just being really close friends. Like, what is that switch? What should it look like in terms of godly dating relationships?
So I think, Tommy always taught us, and we were kind of the inauguration of the Song of Solomon series, and so he would always say, run your race and look over and see who's running beside you, which is a friendship, right? That's the best relationships sometimes start from just that good friendship. I needed, just based on my personality, somebody that was about 2 laps ahead of me, because to be really follow along with what Ephesians said, I needed a man who knew more scripture than me and who loved God ferociously. And so I truly desired to have somebody who was just running at a higher speed than me. So in terms of friendship, our friendship started when we started dating. So we knew each other more as acquaintances, but what happened was Mike was intentional. That's the word I'll use. He initiated it. And I'll tell y'all, just scripturally speaking, there are not clear guidelines for should the man always initiate. But I'm a little old school, and so I always thought that just based on leadership that I wanted the guy to be the initiator. And so Mike I actually liked Mike for about a year before he ever asked me out. And that was a year of truly asking the Lord for things like, God, let him find me attractive. God, let him find me in a crowd of women. God, let him see me. God, let us run into each other at college life, is what it was called back then. God, please help me not to say anything stupid around him. Like, there was just a constant prayer request that I would make before the Lord before Mike ever asked me out.
Well, and I would say, I like you, and I'm not sure if I'm on or not. But my stuff's not as important anyway. But, I would say, so Carrie never wanted, she would never let a guy know she liked her. I was always, if I asked a girl out and she said no, I would have to change churches, because I'd be like, I can't be around this girl ever again. So I kind of liked Carrie as well. And it's a weird deal how God got us together. She was, you tell it.
So I had just lost my dad to cancer, and so this is.
Just real quick. Well, guys, y'all need to know this. When you get married, the girl tells the story, and the girl picks the pictures.
I picked that picture.
I go, I hate that picture, and Carrie's like, oh, but I look good.
I look better in that than that.
We picked it because Carrie, so yeah.
Okay,
so tell the story.
No, but I want you to keep the microphone because you got to add commentary to this. Okay, so I was sitting in the teacher's lounge. I was a counselor at a private Christian school, and I just lost my dad to cancer. And there was a friend of mine who said, is there anybody that you would go out with? I was single, not dating anybody at the time, which was kind of a miracle because dating was my spiritual gift. And so I had broke up with a guy it's not really, don't write that down. It's not a spiritual gifting. I just thought it was. So she said, is there anybody that you would go out with? And I said, yes. If he ever asked me out, and I've prayed he would, I would go out with Mike Scheer. And so that night, she was married, and she went home and told her husband, Ben, guess who Carrie Davis at the time, would go out with? Mike Scheer. Mike happened to be playing basketball with Mike that night. Ben was playing basketball with Mike. So Ben went to Mike and said,
I can take you over to First Baptist and show you right where I was standing on the court, getting ready to take a shot, warming up, and when he said, hey, Carrie Davis would go out with you.
Okay, so Mike stores that away. So the next day, I went back to Lisa in the teacher's lounge. She said, Lisa, listen, I'm discipling girls about what it means to wait on the Lord. So will you promise me that you will never tell anyone that I told you that, because I would never want to be manipulative or to work the system so I need you to keep that information between you and I. And she said, oh, absolutely, I wouldn't tell anybody. So she went home and told her husband, don't you ever tell anybody that I told you, to which her husband said, I will never tell anybody, went to Mike and said, Mike, don't you ever tell my wife that I told you that. So when Mike...
I would never have asked her out had I not known that. So God can use the lies of husbands.
No,
Let
me reframe that. A better way to say that is that your tactics to get someone, your tactics to get together, God is so much bigger and more sovereign than your manipulation to get into a relationship. Like, if truly you will trust him, the way God got a girl who would never let a guy know she was interested, and a guy who would never ask a girl out unless he knew for certain, the way God got that together is called sovereignty and grace. And so you can really trust him that he's bigger than your manipulative plans.
And then the end of that story is like 2 years after we were married, we were somewhere with Ben and Lisa. We were on a date with them, and she was like, I know something about you. I knew Carrie Davis wanted to go out with you, and I said, I know something about you. Your husband lied to you. And she had no idea until like 2 years after we were married, and she was shocked that she was the reason we got together.
But going back to your original question, I will just say, I think that there needs to be intentionality in terms of just the idea inside of a relationship, marriage relationship, of submitting to a guy's authority. I think watching a man be intentional in the way he asks a girl out, like saying, will you go out with me? Like, truly just saying that, will you go out with me? And then initiating, paying for the meal. Like, that is intentional dating. I will tell you, Mike was incredibly creative when we dated. I
used up all my ideas in dating.
He says sometimes, sorry, that's not true. But he's still very creative. But he was very creative, and it was just it was an attractive, sweet, intentional form of dating that we did. But I will say that our friendship grew from that dating relationship. Now, I know a lot of people who've been friends for a long time, and you look over and you see the person running beside you, and you say, hey, I like you, and I like you, and that works great. In the way we worked, I needed somebody 2 laughs ahead.
And I would say for guys, a verse that I tried to keep in mind and I would give to you is Paul tells Timothy, I think it's 1 Timothy 5, he says, treat younger women with absolute purity as a sister. I always say, I'm from Kentucky. We get it backwards. We treat our sisters like our girlfriends, or our girlfriends are our sisters. That's what I'm trying to say. So, no, okay, I won't say that. That goes further, but you'll have to see me afterwards if you want to hear it. But the text actually says that I have an obligation to treat a girl with absolute purity. And so I think that's physical purity. Girls, if a guy's pressuring you, he's either the wrong guy or this is the wrong time. He needs to grow, because remember what we talked about, selfless, sanctifying, I forget them without me in front of me, but there are words that he's supposed to be investing in you, even in a dating relationship. So he needs to treat you with physical purity. But the other thing with that is, like, if you know a girl's really interested in you and you're lonely but you're not interested in that girl, if you're leading her on emotionally or something, like, I feel like that's not absolute purity either, that you have an obligation to protect her as best you can, emotionally, physically, spiritually, that even if you're dating a girl and you break up, that there's still a sense where, if there have been physical boundaries crossed, that makes it harder, especially for a girl. If you have led a girl on, emotionally it can be harder, that you would want a girl to be able to say, you know what, it didn't work out, I really like that guy, it hurt, but I'm spiritually better because of that relationship, even if it didn't go to marriage. So treat a girl with absolute purity.
Yeah, it's really good. I've heard this before, that dating is often, it's not a status to sit in, but a process to move through, and it's easy to take it as a status and say, well, I'm dating now, so I'm good. And it's not to rush through it by any means, but also there's a purpose to it beyond saying, I'm a girlfriend, so I have value. Like, that's a trap to fall into. Lots of questions about communication and conflict. How do you talk about that? Obviously, you can say that in the context of marriage, it's huge. Mostly everybody here is in the dating category. So just some general tips, ideas, ways that you guys think about communication and conflict.
So I'll start, but you just chime in. So I think it's very important to know your bent. And I'll just give you an extreme measure of bents. So when I'm working with kids, and y'all are not children, but because it's more memorable. There are skunks and turtles. So in terms of communication, there are people that will be more bent towards peace. So they want not to conflict. They hate
That's
conflict.
me in our relationship.
Okay, so those are the turtles. So, and sometimes they look like they're more peacemaking, but sometimes they're actually peace faking because they so reject conflict that they'll crawl into the shell anytime there's a slight conflict.
Did I say that's me in our relationship? Yeah, that's totally me.
Okay, so the other extreme, and this is God's grace, I think he oftentimes puts you in relationships with opposites for very good reasons. So the other end of that spectrum, so if there's peacemaking that are more prone to, turtles who are more prone to hide from their conflict. Then there's the skunk, who usually lets you know what the problems are up front. They're more aggressive. They don't mind fighting, and they don't mind doing it verbally, sometimes very aggressively. So that's me. Okay, so I run a little hot, and I don't mind fighting. So the way this works in our relationship is, one, we had to know that about each other. I had to know that I am more prone to being aggressive or angry or getting easily frustrated in a relationship, and Mike is more prone to run from that. And so the way that works is you're moving to the center, which there's 3 things that we do in every conflict. You talk it out. Well, the first one is you overlook it. So there are things in a relationship you step over, like Mike leaving his clothes on the floor. After 28 years, you step over it. It's not worth a fight. I pick it up and I put it in it's not worthy of, it says in Proverbs,
I don't know what you're talking
about. The 3.
I'm so going into a shell right now. I'm done.
So, okay. No, there's just things you don't fight about. Like you just say, when we were dating, Mike had 3 piles in his bedroom. Pile A was what came out of the dryer. Pile B was worn one time, and pile C was I could wear it running, but I knew C had to be washed.
How many guys?
Okay, so.
Okay, there you go.
Right. So I had to have a hard conversation with him because I'm a very clean person, and I knew that would lead to conflict in our relationship. But there's just a part of that I accept and love about him, and he does laundry great, but there are things you overlook in marriage. Actually, in a dating relationship, there's things worthy of overlooking. The second thing you do is talk it out, and that's where you apply biblical principles to conflict. Knowing your bent matters because I have to memorize verses like, even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent. Like, I have had to memorize verses on what it means to overlook a conflict and to have healthy communication when we're fighting. So overlook it, talk it out. And the third thing is when that doesn't work, you ask for help. And I will say help has come to us not just in talking to people about our conflicts, but in community, but also in reading good books that have helped us. There are 2 that I would highly recommend. One is called Peacemakers. You only need about the first 5 chapters, which tells you, it makes you evaluate how you, and every person in this room has been raised in a family. The family system does teach you communication, but you've also been raised in a body that's more prone to a certain way of communication. So those are influential factors, but you have, as you walk with Jesus, the determinative force of the Spirit of God living in you that is bent towards healthy communication. You just have to know what health in communication looks like. So Peacemakers by Ken Sande is a phenomenal book. You only need the first 6 chapters. And then the second one is War of Words. It's a little harder to read, but it's by Paul Tripp, and I highly recommend those. It's taught us how to actually fight fair, fight clean, fight well. You're going to fight when you're in a relationship, or what was the word we used? We're going to communicate hard. Hard communication, yes.
Yeah, the only 2 things I would add would be, one thing I have noticed, I always say, so I'm in my 50s, I say I'm the perfect middle. I'm not the old guy or the young guy. I am the old guy, I know that, but I like to say I'm not. But we're in a church with a lot of old guys, and our old guys and young guys oftentimes don't talk. And by guys, I mean guys and ladies. And I think one of the values of a church body of all different ages is if you're in a dating relationship, there is good counsel. There's people that we've been married 28 years. There's a lot of couples that would be happy to grab a cup of coffee and talk with you. Jake could probably set that up, or Presley, or however we need to. But there's those opportunities, I think, where you don't have to recreate the wheel. We've made those mistakes, so we can kind of talk you through some of that stuff. Second thing I would say is once you get married, you fight like heck to keep that marriage together, right? Because we've made a covenant before God. We fight to keep that together. Conflict, there should be conflict in every relationship as it deepens because we are different. We're marrying a sinner. And the world is puts pressure on us. And so there should be conflict. But if you find in dating that you're having a lot of conflict, if you're having to work to keep your dating relationship together, I would encourage you to get counsel. That may not be a relationship that you would want to pursue on into marriage, because marriage will make that harder. And I remember Tom would always tell us, you don't fight to keep a dating relationship alive. You fight to keep a marriage alive. And so if you find yourself fighting all the time, that's something you need to take notice of, I think. Would you agree with that?
Yes, because in dating relationship, there's a lot of things that you don't see that marriage exposes. And so it is, it's a sweet time where you're in love and lost in that sometimes. And so I think you don't work heavy to keep a dating relationship together. I'm not saying there might not be exceptions if I sat down and talked to somebody and heard a story, because I think if they're willing participants in being teachable and really learning through that, then yes. But I do think if there's constant conflict in a dating relationship, that is a huge red flag, huge red flag.
That's good. I think a helpful follow-up to that is the next question of, how do you know they are the one? I think we got that question maybe 6 times of, how do I know they're the one? Just kind of the language of that. And what is it that you're looking for? How do you know? Maybe you're dating, you're engaged. Well, hopefully you've gotten to a decent idea if you're engaged. But what are those things that you're looking for when you talk about, I have confidence to move into engagement or marriage with a person that I'm dating?
I'll start with the one. Is there a right person? And if you're dating, how do you know that they are? Okay, so I have a problem with this question, and let me just try to unpack it a little bit. To ask the question, is there the one, assumes that there's a wrong one. And then what happens is when there is a marriage, so say you get married because you believe it's the one, and inside of marriage there's conflict, that can have a devastating impact on your marriage because you immediately think, oh my goodness, I married the wrong one. So I personally don't believe in the one unless you're married. When you get married, you are married to the one, because marriage is difficult, it's hard. 2 people that are sinners trying to look like Jesus does produce a lot of problems, and you will conflict in marriage. But in marriage, that is a covenant that God has given you, and I can assure you that inside of marriage, you are married to the one. Now, are there things that give you greater peace and contentment as you move towards the altar? I would say yes. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. And I think, I kind of think of it this way, that oftentimes we like, as much as I say I don't like rules, I kind of like rules. I like to be told, do this, don't do that, because I know I'm not making a mistake. And I feel God gives us much more freedom than oftentimes we understand or appreciate. That God, I think there's certain things that I am to be, and there's certain things I'm to look for. Is she a believer? I used to say that's the big one, is she a believer? But, is she a believer? Is she someone I'm attracted to, that I enjoy being with? In Genesis 2, it says that marriage is given for companionship. Is this someone that I just enjoy being with? And then is this someone who's cultivating really the attributes of Ephesians 4 and 5? Is this someone who seeks unity, that walks in humility, that is characterized by kindness and patience? Is this someone who walks in love and walks in light and values the Scripture? Is this 1 Corinthians 13? Is this someone that's not perfect, but is seeking to grow in these areas? Because I will tell you, I have seen a lot of harsh Christian women. That a lady who I go, well, she's a Christian, yeah, I'll marry her. And I've had a couple buddies marry girls, But man, those girls were rigid and harsh and became bitter. And so I would say, from a guy's perspective, is she someone who's teachable? You know, is she someone who can admit wrong? Is she someone that you can cultivate the conversations of confession and repentance? So if I confess, you know, I want my wife to be someone who knows me best. I don't have to hide anything. She knows me best. She knows my dark areas much more than any of y'all do, and yet she loves me most. And so is she one who forgives? Is she one who confesses, who repents? Like all those words we talk about, I think become real important.
And I'll just talk practically. I did make a list of what I was looking for in a spouse. I'm just going to tell
So we did premarital counseling, and there was a question they said, list your expectations. And I wrote on mine, it was that question and in all these blanks. And I wrote none, is what I said.
Unrolled the scroll. I had like 5 pages.
She stapled pages to the back of it because the page wasn't enough.
So, no, I really made a list of what I was looking for. I wanted the list to be biblical. Like I wasn't looking off the list. Like I think I did put hot at the top of the list, because I think you need to be attracted to the person truly. And so I don't know if I could find that in the Bible. Can you find a hot husband in the Bible? I don't know, but I did put that at the top of the list. My list was pretty short. So it was, do they love God more than they love me? And I will tell you, when I was dating, I used to do this test. I don't recommend this, but I wanted a guy to love God more than me. And so I was dating a guy, or a guy was asking me out, we were dating. And I would say, on Sunday, because our church was on Sunday nights, and I would say, I'm not going to go to church tonight. I just don't feel like it. And I would see what the response was. And a guy often would say, me neither. What do you want to do tonight? Until I met Mike Scheer. And I said one night, I'm just not going to go to church tonight. And he goes, okay, well, I'll call you on Monday. Love you. Left me. And
a lot of other girls in church.
That is not. No. Okay. You just ruined my story.
I mean, godly. Go back to
okay. Truly, but I am just telling y'all, by the way he lived his life, I needed him to love God more than he loved me. Truly. And that's one of the ways that I saw him. I wanted to be attracted to him. I didn't want a guy that I was dating to be lazy, because I think that's important in terms of just leadership. I wanted him to be teachable. And I will tell y'all, Mike said it, but I cannot underline enough what it means to be teachable in a relationship. That a person who is not teachable is a prideful person who comes into a relationship thinking they got it all together. And a humble person is a teachable person that says, I want to grow, and I am in process just like you are. So that's big. And then I'll just tell y'all, so from my family of origin, my dad struggled with being very hot-tempered. So he was just easily angered. And I was attracted, just by design, I was attracted to guys that were hot-headed or that I could save. Like I was Missionary Dater 101. And so I had to pray that God would help me to be attracted to kind men, because I wasn't. I was attracted to angry, hot-headed humans. I don't know if that is a family thing. I don't know what it was. But I had to pray that and then keep my eyes open, because Mike was a kind human, and I saw it when we were dating. I can tell you on one hand how many times Mike has ever gotten mad at the boys or myself. On one hand, how many times he's truly been mad at us. And that is something God has allowed me to cover over my own sin in my family. The thing that I did get from my dad is he was very funny. We laughed all the time. And so on my list was a guy that could make me laugh. And I will say, Mike Scheer makes me laugh all the time. The last thing I had on my list is that he could dance. We're working on that. That's the only thing we're still. Oh, yeah, and we got the coffee down, but we're working on the dancing.
But I will tell you, the ability to say, I'm sorry, and the ability to say, I forgive you, like, that is not common, and that is so important, to cultivate that language in your relationship.
Oh, my gosh, and we still do it. Like Monday we were fighting about something, and our fights are not, like, not
no,
gonna drag out.
Like, I'm sitting here honestly going, we were fighting yesterday.
I know, right? So it was about vacations, I think.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
We were.
So I was mad about something, and honestly, I was just being a brat. And I had to get alone with the Lord. I'm owning it. I totally take full responsibility. I got alone with the Lord. I went on a walk, and I came back, and I said, I'm so sorry. I was disrespectful. I was rude with my words. This is not true. You're this. I just went, and immediately when those words are spoken and forgiveness is granted, two hearts that could be divided in a moment come back together. Being able to say, develop a language, even in your dating relationship, of being able to say, I'm sorry and I forgive you. Like there is grace for that. It's something we say to each other all the time.
I like this question a lot. This is second to last one, right? I think that math works. Today, many older couples confess that the feeling, all caps, of love fades away over time. How do you maintain your passion for each other? Kind of as a two-parter of that, what is the role of feelings? You have the physical attraction element, but also just the overall feelings and affections. But you could say in marriage, I would agree with the whole thing of, how much do you want to fight in dating? I'm curious, even y'all's thoughts on how much do feelings and affections weigh as you're evaluating in a dating relationship?
I want to start this one because I take great offense to the question. What you started out by saying an older couple? Many older couples? We are. I was going to say, do you know any older couples?
Yes.
Have you asked any?
There are wrinkles right there. That's older couple.
So, okay, as older couples. So, can I say what Cody and them? So we met with a life group, and they're a little bit older than you guys. They're probably all 30, and they're talking about church transition.
They were asking us questions. They said, "Can you come to our study and talk about the transition?" And we said, "Sure."
Yeah, we're talking about who's going to preach, what's it going to be like, when's Jake preaching? He's going to preach this date, like all this. By the way, do you guys still have sex? It's like, where did that come from? And the guy goes, well, we've talked to a lot of people, even at Denton Bible, that are your age. Then he said 60, and I'm like, that's not my age. Right. I'm 56, so don't put me in the grave, but I'm 56. And he said, but this guy said, hey, no, we haven't had sex in forever, and none of our friends have sex either. Sorry, Presley, close your ears. We have sex, And I think feelings and passion. What'd you say?
Nothing. Carry on.
What'd she say?
You spoke to the frequency.
Oh. Yeah. So did you say often? And then I said, but not quite enough, is what I said. Yeah, as a guy, So, what was I even talking about?
Okay, so
I'm thinking
feelings.
About sex now.
We're talking about feelings.
Feelings.
How much do feelings come into play?
Yes. And I would say they're incredibly important because you don't. Genesis 2, that marriage is given. So the Garden of Eden, the word Eden literally means delight. So God puts Adam in a garden called delight. He looks at Adam and he says it's not good, meaning it's incomplete, that Adam is alone. Adam doesn't know he's alone. God notices he's alone. And so he says, I will make a helper suitable. And the words there, helper suitable, could really be translated companion. I will make a companion for him. That I will make his best friend. I will make somebody that if Adam gets the choice of being with one human on earth, it's going to be her. It's going to be Eve. And I think that, and when Adam sees her, the first word spoken in the Bible, not by God, is Adam, and he speaks a love poem. And it's a bad love poem, but, he's just created. So he's like a little kid, I guess, when he on love poem-y type stuff. But he says, bone in my bone, flesh in my flesh. He actually starts it by saying now or at last. And because when he names all the animals, it says he names all the animals, yet there was not found a helper suitable. The exact same wording of what God says. Not a helper suitable. Adam doesn't find a helper suitable. Now, at last, I have